Who murdered Pauline Pusser? Stay tuned for this special edition of Buford Pusser, The Other Story. Thank you for joining me in this program. This is August 2024, and 57 years ago this month, Pauline Pusser lost her life. Questions linger, however. Was her death due to an ambush that was meant for her husband, Buford Pusser, the sheriff of McNairy County, as legend has it? Or was she murdered, possibly even by her husband? People often ask how I became so interested in the Pusser story. Well, I was a young law enforcement officer in the early 70s, and so naturally I was just instantly interested in Buford's story. And then when the movie came out, it was even more so. You wanted to emulate Buford. I think every young law enforcement officer did. After all, he set a new standard for law enforcement at that time. So I began researching his story, and one of the first things I learned is that after the ambush, there was never an autopsy report that was completed on Pauline. Now, of course, I didn't blame Buford because he didn't have control over that. It was the system that broke down, I thought. Well, then the next thing that I ran into as I was researching was a story by Barbara Bivens and Shirley Smith saying that the night before the ambush that they heard Buford and Pauline having a big argument, with Pauline threatening to expose his corruption and Buford responding by saying that if she tried that, she wouldn't live to see the light of day. Now, I found that to be very interesting, but then the next thing was I accidentally met Dennis Hathcock online. Now, this was in the early 90s by now. And back then, there wasn't much that you could learn on the internet. It was relatively new and not much information there about Buford. But I did go over and meet with Dennis, and he told me the story that he knew. And that being that the night of the ambush, he had been following Buford around, he and his friend Johnny Harrison. And this is something they did as a matter of entertainment, I guess. You're in a small town, you don't have much to do, so hey, let's follow the sheriff around for a while. And in doing so, they saw a gun exchange that took place at Eastview. They didn't think a whole lot about it, but then the next morning they learned that there had been an ambush, that Buford had been wounded and Pauline had been killed. So Dennis went over that way, found the second ambush site that the authorities weren't aware of yet, and eventually he took them down to where that took place. And there was a lot of things there that just didn't fit Buford's story as I researched it. I also got to thinking about, the route that Buford had taken that morning. Now, typically, I think somebody going down to answer a disturbance call at Hollis Jordan's place on Highway 45, about a mile north of the state line, would have taken Highway 64 and 45 from Adamsville. Now, while the route that he took, a convoluted system of back roads, would have been a little bit shorter, it would have taken a lot longer to navigate because the roads were unimproved at that time. And in heading that way, he had to cross both highways 142 and 57. And why he didn't take those on to 45 and get to Hollis Jordan's Tavern, I don't know. I thought it was suspicious. At this point, some friends and I reconstructed the ambush as Buford told it. We put a Cadillac, beside the Methodist church. I drove a car right past the church on New Hope Road. I had my cruise control set at 45 miles an hour, and the Cadillac gave chase. And we did this in daylight. And by the time that I had traveled at 7/10 of a mile to the first ambush site, the Cadillac, trying as hard as they might, had not caught up with me yet. They were still a long ways off in my rearview mirror. So I knew that the ambush didn't happen the way that Buford had described it to be. Then, beyond that, I started interviewing people who lived their own part of the real story. People such as the county coroner, Ward Moore. Now, Ward had some interesting things to say because he told me that the night of the ambush, that Carl Pusser, who was working as a jailer and dispatcher that night, called him at home in the early morning hours and told him he needed to get over to Buford and Pauline's, that they were in the middle of a fight and they were about to kill each other. So Ward drove to Adamsville from Selmer. When he got there, neither Buford nor Pauline were there. But while he was there, he did look around. He saw droplets of blood on the carpet, and that droplets being like from a busted lip, a bloodied nose, where the blood is falling vertically down to the floor. That's as opposed to blood spatter like you'd see from a gunshot wound, which is dynamic and just spreads everywhere. At any rate, I kept on interviewing people. I still had that autopsy report on my mind, so I called Dr. Jerry Francisco, a medical examiner in Memphis, and he would have been the one to typically have done the autopsy. And he informed me that one was never requested. He felt like there should have been, and we discussed the matter thoroughly. I also interviewed Griffin Mullins, Pauline's brother, to see what he knew about the ambush. And he told me that as far as he knew, it happened just like that Buford said. Of course, back then, they didn't have cell phones, didn't have the internet. There wasn't much way of getting information, so he just accepted what he had been told. Now, I might mention that he is the one that signed off finally to have autopsy performed on Pauline this year. I also interviewed several friends of Pauline's, such as LaVon Plunk. Of course, LaVon was the one that said that she heard a gunshot come from the Pusser home the night of the alleged ambush. I interviewed several of Pauline's co-workers there in Adamsville from back in the day. Also, some of her grandchildren and even some of her great-grandchildren to see what they knew. Now, beyond that, I spent some time interviewing a lot of the club owners down there. I wanted to see if this State Line mob actually had a syndicate like it showed in Walking Tall, and I learned quickly that they didn't. They all considered themselves as competitors to each other. And I interviewed Betty Sparks, who had the Anchor Club. Also, Paul Moore, who had Moore's Place on Highway 57. Shirley Smith, she and her husband Junior operated the Old Hickory Grill in Guys, Tennessee, just north of the state line. And then, of course, there was Skeet Atkins. He and his wife, Catherine, operated Catherine's Club there in Selmer, among others. Then I started interviewing some of the people that were moonshiners of the day, and as well as some of the bootleggers. Now, the bootleggers would bring bonded liquor down from Caruthersville, Missouri, where it could be sold. They would bring it across the state line down through the state of Tennessee all the way to the state line, and that would be where that they would leave it. Also spoke to Paul David English. Now, he is the only person I know of that was ever shot by Buford that was not shot in the head. And he's the only person also that survived being shot by Buford. And there's a reason for that. That's because the Corinth chief of police, Art Murphy, was with Buford when he shot Paul David English. Now, I interviewed lots of law enforcement people from those days, all of them contemporaries of Buford's, people that knew Buford. And all of them seemed to have a different opinion about Buford other than what we learned in the movie. They always thought that there was something suspicious about the ambush as well. Of course, they just didn't want to come out and say it. They had no proof, just their own thoughts. Then there was members of Jim Moffitt's family. Now, Jim was Buford's chief deputy, and I found out that he left Buford twice while he was working for the sheriff's office, in that he didn't really put a lot of trust in Buford. He once told his family that if anything ever happened to him, they need not look further than Buford PUSSER. And this was right after Buford had shot and killed Louise Hathcock. I think one of the most interesting things that I got into, I've had several people share photographs, all kinds of information. But one day I got a call from a person who follows my page, my Facebook page, which is Buford PUSSER, the other story, and said he thought he had the rifle that may have been used in the ambush. Now, I think I've heard that story at least a dozen times, but every time I follow up on it because you never know what the result's going to be. But this was the first one that checked all the boxes. I mean, we could trace this gun right back to Buford. So I got in my car, went over there, got the information off the gun, shot it a few times, kept some of the casings and projectiles, so on. And after talking to this individual, he agreed to allow me to contact the TBI about it. And so I did. That was about 14 months ago. And since then, all sorts of things have happened. I know that they've opened up the investigation again. They've contacted several people, interviewed a bunch. I know this because a lot of these people call and let me know. And of course, I've shared a lot of information with the TBI, some of the recordings that I made of interviews, and different things from my files, so on and so forth, because as a former law enforcement officer myself, I want to help in any way I can. I want to see this case come to some sort of fruition. So that has probably been the most important thing that I've seen happen in this. And I know that now that they've exhumed Pauline, a lot of people are making videos and trying to get the word out. A lot of them are basically using my research. I don't know how else to put it. I have seen no one else out there working on this longer than I have been. So enough said about that. Let's get on with the rest of it. Tonight, joining me will be Dennis Hathcock, who found the second ambush site and led investigators to it. We also have Tim Lancaster. Now, his father, Ralph, was a deputy sheriff in Alcorn County, and he was at the ambush site that day. He came away with an entirely different view, or at least theory, than what Buford had presented as what had happened. Now, he used the term double cross, and that's the first time I had heard that term. So I'll let Tim explain it to you. So here we go. I'll tell you what, I'll get started off by just saying that, there's always been lots of questions about the time when Pauline was killed, about who did it, who was involved, why, so on and so forth. So let me just get started by going through what happened that morning, or better yet, what happened the evening before. I know, Dennis, that you had and Johnny Harrison had been following Buford that night just for entertainment. And you followed him to Eastview. And when you got there, you were on a pile of chert because the little park there is where Buford would often meet his girlfriends. Now, what did you see when you got there and when Buford arrived?
He pulled up beside of his girlfriend's car, and he told her, said, get your butt out of here right now. I mean, right now. That wasn't normal, but anyway, so she cranks up and goes to pull off. There's a car coming across on Highway 57 where it crossed 45 right there, and you went straight into that little park. They almost hit head on. Almost, and she turned, went back up towards Selmer. The car came on in, circled kind of around the park, backed up it under it was an old Mercury light that there was something wrong with it. It wasn't real bright. It just, anyway, but we could see, pop the trunks on them. They went back there. They got two long guns out of the Biscayne. It was a Chevrolet Biscayne. Put them over in Pusser's car. He closed the trunk. They closed the trunk. They left, went back across the road toward Raymer. They turned. Pusser came back out on the highway and went towards Selmer, wide open. And we went to Selmer because I knew he was probably going up there to his girlfriend's house.
Okay.
And he was. When we got up there, there was a place we could go to where we could see down there. And he was out beating on the door and beating on the sides of the house, screaming, let me in, let me in. You won't see me anymore after tonight, all, and that went on for probably 10 or 15 minutes. And then I guess we couldn't see the very front door. I guess they opened the door, let him come in. And from the angle we were sitting at, we didn't see him come out the door, but they were standing in front of the house. And he was pulling her arm. And she was kind of fighting to get away from him. And he pulled her out toward the middle of the street. And she got away from him and took off running and run to their house. She lived with her mother and dad. She ran to their house, and there was a door toward the back of the house that she got in. He started after her, but then he stopped, turned around, and came back to the car. Again, took off wide open, throwing. There was some gravel and squalling tires out on the road.
At that point, you followed him down to a service station in Selmer?
Right.
and he got gas and then headed back to Adamsville. What did you and Johnny think at that point?
Well, we thought it was all over. He was going back to Adamsville, you know. So we went home, went to sleep.
Okay. And after that, I might add that, that's when Carl Pusser, who was working as a dispatcher and jailer that night, stated that he got a call from someone claiming that there was a disturbance at Hollis Jordan's place, state line, and that, it was pretty violent. Somebody needed to get out there, but for whatever reason, Carl didn't think it was that important, didn't need to get Buford out of bed, so he just let it go. Now, a short time later, Buford got a call at his residence with the party saying basically the same thing. There's a disturbance at Hollis Jordan. Somebody's going to get killed. And told Buford he needed to get down there. Well, as Buford was getting ready, he claimed that Pauline said that she wanted to go with him because she was worried about his safety. What gets so complicated at this point is that that doesn't jive with other stories that others have told. For instance, Ward Moore, who was a county coroner, would say along in that same time period, he got a call from Carl Pusser saying, Buford and Pauline are in a fight. They're about to kill each other. You need to get over to their house. Well, Ward said that he went over there. When he got there, Buford and Pauline were gone. While he was in the living room, he looked around and all he saw was some droplets of blood, which is different from like blood spatter from a gunshot that was on the carpet. Not much of that at all. And said there wasn't anything he could do, so he left. Now, along about the same time frame, you would have LaVon Plunk, Pauline's best friend, tell a story about how that she had been with Pauline that night, had taken her home. She had parked down the street a little ways because Pauline was going in to get some of her personal belongings, get the kids, and they were going to leave. Buford and Pauline had been separated. I don't know the exact time frame of this. No one seems to be able to put a finger on it after all these years, but at any rate, LaVon is waiting down the street when Buford passes by. Now, LaVon didn't want to go in because she was afraid of Buford. And she sat there not knowing what to do, and a little bit of time passes by and she hears a single gunshot. She kind of panics, doesn't know exactly what she should be doing, so she leaves. She knows she can't call the sheriff's office because Carl is the one that will take the call. She knows she can't call her husband, Petey, because he is one of Buford's most trusted deputies, and she figures that Petey would lie for Buford. So while she was trying to figure out what she could do, Petey calls her and says, well, Pauline was killed in an ambush meant for Buford. Now, along about this same time frame, Diane would tell a story that she heard Buford and Pauline in the living room. She heard a pop, didn't know what it was. A little bit later, she heard Buford open the front door. She looked out a window, saw Buford carry Pauline to his car, place her in the front seat, walk back toward the house, and pick up the shoes that had fallen from Pauline's feet, take them over in front of him, put them in the front floorboard of the car. Now, he leaves, and that's the last time that Diane saw her mother to be alive. Now, there's a lot of time missing in between that and the time that the ambush took place, because it took place at 4:45. Now, Dennis, we'll pick back up with you. How did you learn about the ambush?
Well, like I said, we went home. I went to sleep. Johnny, he went back to his house. He lived in Selwyn. About, I'd guess is around 5:36, somewhere along in there. My granddad come in there and woke me up and said, Dennis, Johnny's in there on the phone and said he got to talk to you. I said, what does he want? He said, I don't know. He said it's a matter of life and death. He had to talk to you. So I got up and I said, what's wrong? And he said, oh, ambushed Buford and Pauline. They killed her. And they don't think that he's going to live to make it to Memphis. I said, oh, Johnny, you know, hell, it hadn't been 2 hours since we saw him. And, well, I said, who told you that? He told me that some deputy had come by and told his dad, woke him up. And of course, that's another story why he would. But anyway.
So at that point, you got on your motorcycle and rode over to New Hope
That's
Road.
right. That's right. And so I go get on my motorcycle and ride over there, one but about a mile over there to it. And so I turned back on the road, and there sat RC Matlock on the little bridge down there, and I pulled up. And I said, he said, what are you doing here, little Hathcock? I said, well, what are you doing here? He said, well, this is where they ambushed Buford and killed Pauline, and they're taking him to Memphis. Don't think he's going to live. I said, well, happened right here? He said, yeah, right here. See that glass over there? There's a little old pile of glass, about like you broke a vent window out of a car. He said, you better get your butt out of here right now, because they're on their way. I said, who? All the police, every kind of cop in the world's on their way. You don't need to be here. I said, okay. I took off, went on down the road there a couple of miles. There was all kinds of glass in the middle of the road down there. And I mean, that's the first thing I saw. I started stopping, and I got stopped, put my kickstand down on my motorcycle, went to get off. And when I went to get off, there's a little ditch there that they had just cleaned out with the grader. And I was looking, and I thought that it looked like the top is a piece of bone, looked like a piece of skull about this big around, and had some of it still had the scalp attached to it, and that blonde hair with blood, all matted in blood. And
was this about the time that you spotted the shell casings?
Yes, and they're on the road. I walked over there and looked at them, come back, got on my motorcycle, and went back to tell them that I'd found that down there, and RC didn't pay no attention to me, and I went to pull off, and here came all kinds of cops. I parked, sit there, listened to them talk and tell what Petey was down there telling them the sniper's nest down there, and he was telling them all about what happened and what Buford told him before he left with him on going to Memphis. And I sit there and look at.
At this point, is that when you took Warren Jones down to the second ambush site?
Not one. I had to sit there and listen to that for a pretty good time before Warren Jones and them came. When he got there, he walked by me, and I said, Mr. Jones, this isn't where it happened. And he said, what do you mean it's not where it happened? I said, well, it happened on down the road here. And he said, how do you know? I said, well, because I went down there and saw it. And I said, there's holes all over the road, glass and this. He said, where? I said, right about a couple of miles. He didn't say nothing. He walked on over there to the bridge. They stood around, talked for a while. Petey Plunk was trying to tell them that, oh, here's where the sniper's nest was and all that. But, so he turned around and came back, and he said, where'd you say that was? It's about 2 miles down the road. And he said, well, I said, I'll tell you what, I'll just go on down there. He told me to go on down there and I'll just wait and show you where everything is. I said, you can't miss it though. So I go on my motorcycle and go down there and sit. And sure enough, here in just a little while here, they came. Here come a highway patrolman first, and then him. And of course, they was out, and I was showing them where the top of her head was, and they could see where the holes and glass and everything was. And then I left and came home.
Nobody ever took your statement.
Nope.
Okay. You know, the TBI placed the ambush is occurring at about 4:45. And of course, Buford wasn't heard from or seen until something like 10 minutes after 6 a.m., which is about an hour and a half. So it leads you to wonder what happened during that next hour and a half from 4:45 on. Now, Tim, let me get you in here. Tim, why don't you tell me about what your dad saw that morning at the ambush scenes?
Pretty much what everybody else saw. The suspicious placing of the shell casings that didn't indicate a rolling ambush, or that would go along with the story that was being told. And like Dennis said, the glass, it just didn't indicate a rolling ambush.
Okay.
Especially at the first sight.
Right. What kind of opinion did he draw from what he saw there that day?
Well, he came up with this. I say came up with it. He just always used this term double cross. I'm not sure. It's been a while since, we had talked about that, and he passed in 2009, but he said that somebody had to have been there, or his theory was somebody was there and was the trigger man for the rifle, and that Buford had grabbed the rifle barrel and put it up against his chin to where he wanted him to shoot him.
Right.
And Dad always thought that whoever was the trigger man was smart enough to know that Buford probably would in turn shoot him and then claim that he protected his wife, or well, didn't protect her, but protected. Not protected, but shot the guy that was trying to kill him. And he thinks the person that was holding the gun kind of realized that, or thought Buford might do that, and then was going to try to shove the barrel in closer. And I think that's what might have taken off more than what Buford really wanted done to his face.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, because Buford's said, now his story was that when he reached the second ambush stop, the site, he opened the door and started to get out, had 1 foot out on the ground, said that the Cadillac returned. We don't know where it returned from because obviously it was behind him, which brings up a lot of questions. But he said that they pulled up alongside of him and started shooting again. And his story was that he got hit in the chin. He fell to the floorboard, which he claimed probably saved his life. Now, at that point, he said Pauline got hit, and he claimed that was when she was killed. He claimed that she was only wounded at the first site. He told the story about how that at the first site that she was hit in the head. She leaned over, grabbed him by the arm, was gurgling blood and gasping for air, and he hit the gas, drove 2 miles down the road. Now, something that's always bothered me about that is that if they were behind him at any time, by that time, he knew that somebody was chasing him down. So why would they not have their headlights on? Why would he not see them in behind him? But yet he claimed that They pulled up on him at the second sight, stuck the gun out the window, shot him. He went to the floorboard. Then they shot her, killed her there, and that he laid there in the floorboard for a while. Said he reached up, grabbed the steering wheel, pulled himself back up into the seat, and when he looked over, the ambush party was still there. And so he reached out, grabbed the barrel of the rifle, which would explain why his fingerprints might be on that rifle. At any rate, said they didn't fire any more shots, and he held on to it until they drove off. And
See,
that's a bizarre story.
well, I don't know when his story came out about him grabbing the rifle barrel.
It came out almost immediately because it was in the newspaper a day or so later.
Yeah, because that was Dad's thought immediately that day, that he thought Buford had placed the barrel up to his ship. Now, why I don't know where he came up with that. That was just his theory that he had somebody to basically shoot the gun into his chin, but the person shooting the gun, whoever that person may be, I mean, I've got my theories on that, but just thought that Buford would double cross him. So this guy was going to double cross Buford, and
therefore the double cross.
Yes,
what
I know
also
it's kind of different
about this? Go ahead.
No, that's it. That's all I was saying.
I was just going to say, what also gets you about this is the fact that there was blood on the front bumper, the hood, the outside of the windshield, top, and even the trunk lid of the car, as if someone had been standing in front of the vehicle when they were shot. Yet Buford claimed that neither he nor Pauline ever got out, which seems to lend some credibility to what your dad was saying.
Right. And Dad thought that that's exactly what happened, how the blood got on the front of the car. They were standing in the front of the car, and then, and I'm sure more damage than what Buford thought was going to happen to his chin. I don't know if he went forward or he just went down to the ground and the car, and they jumped in and drove off. But I also kind of wonder why they just didn't go ahead and finish him off.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's obviously what you would expect to have happened, but yet it didn't. And
right.
So something that has always bothered me also is that if the TBI and Jim Moffitt were correct that this alleged ambush took place somewhere around 4:45, now I believe Hugh Kirkpatrick, who was the chief of police of Selmer, and Dennis, correct me if I'm mistaken here, he was related to Helen Pusser. Is that correct?
Right.
And
no, well, his wife, Miss Pearl, was and her were I've heard that's pretty close related.
But at any rate, he alleged that he heard Buford's call, which he was mumbling all this on the radio, probably because his chin was blown away, which is understandable. But this happened at 6:10. This was almost an hour and a half after the TBI and Moffitt said the ambush took place. So it makes you question, what was Buford doing during all this time? Hour and a half goes by, and he's found approximately 8 miles from the ambush site there in Eastview is where they found him. So what was he doing during all this time? I've always questioned about, since I've started studying this, is it possible that Buford didn't get shot in the chin until just before he was found? That, maybe the alleged ambush took place at 4:45, but Buford may not have actually been shot in the chin until a little before 6, rather than at 4:45. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does.
It's just like it's just like with the time discrepancy that seems to exist between the time that Carl called and to the ambush itself. There's some time missing. It's kind of like, what was going on then? There's just all kinds of unanswered questions here that Buford never seemed to be able to clear up.
Well, you touched on it a while ago, that what I never understood is when he supposedly sped off from these assassins who just drove at incredible rates of speed to catch up with him in the dark with no headlights within 0.7 of a mile. They were obviously good drivers. I don't know how he sped off and left them and then had time to stop, check on her. What did they do that whole time? They would have had to almost slow down to a crawl for him to get.
They have done that.
Right. Why would they have done that?
Buford's story, any way you look at it, doesn't seem to hold a lot of merit.
No.
There's just so many things there that you wonder about. You have to, and we haven't even touched on the fact that the night before all this happened, that you had two people at the Old Hickory Grill that heard Buford threaten Pauline, saying that, she had threatened to report his corruption. And Buford was said to have told her, if you try and do that, you won't live to see the light of day. So now, next thing you know, the ambush occurs and Pauline is indeed dead. So just lots of mystery.
A lot of dots. That's right. A lot of dots out there that connect, that the dots shouldn't even be there to connect, but there's too many dots that connect.
Dennis, tell me this. Your dad once owned a Cadillac almost like the one that Buford described, correct?
That's correct.
And where was that Cadillac at the time of the ambush?
Sitting on a dealer's lot in Tupelo.
So it makes you wonder, did Buford try to frame your dad, not knowing that your dad had sold that vehicle and it was had been in Tupelo for some time?
Well, I've been told that he had somebody he was in the car with somebody, and they came by the house where Dad was, and he just sold that car about a week before that happened to a dealer in Tupelo. And that's about the time that they came by and he saw the car. And that's what he was having this person to do, was to case the house so he could see what kind of car it was. So, TBI, I think Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, all of them went and took samples from that car. Nothing matched up. It
didn't match with anything at New Hope Road
right.
or anywhere along that trek. So,
right.
I understand that whenever Buford got back from Memphis at the hospital there, that the TBI questioned him for every time he'd walk through the door. It seemed, I'm told, that they were pretty much on him and Carl, trying to break their stories about what that they had told. And I guess they had been around and played the game long enough that they knew that they had to stick with their original story to the TBI, but yet Buford would tell varying versions when he would talk to newspapers and magazines about what happened. And the story would always change some, because originally he was telling that he was responding to a call on 45 at Hollis Jordan's. Yet later, he would come up with a story that he was looking for something along New Hope Road that he was supposed to find. And it was almost like that he was trying to make his story fit with what he had learned about the way the ambush investigation was going.
I never understood why Hollis's name came up in the first place.
I don't.
As far as
I
the
don't know.
location, because if obviously it wouldn't have changed from Hollis to New Hope Road. It's just that was always strange to me.
Well,
But why,
as a matter of fact, that made it the story a little more complicated in the fact that he would take that convoluted route that he took to
right,
get to Hollis Jordan's on 45 when he could have more easily just gone down Highway 64 and 45 and got there. It's a little bit longer that way, but the roads are so much better,
right.
64 and 45, than that route that he took, that it would have been a whole lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on it, but I think that he killed Pauline or choked her, whatever happened. He drove down New Hope Road, came down through there, and he went to Hollis Jordan's place. Some people saw him at Hollis Jordan's. That's why he had to change his story to bring Hollis Jordan's place into it, because I think some people told that they had seen him, and I'm pretty sure that Hollis was involved in it in some way.
Well, I understand
They were just like that. I mean, PUSSER and him, Hollis Jordan could do anything he wanted to, and PUSSER let it ride.
Well, I understand that Hollis Jordan's son would often tell that his mother had told him that Hollis and Buford were the two that were involved. Don't know if there's any truth to that at all. So it's just another thing that kind of messes with the story, I guess I should say, because it is so. There's just so many moving parts to this that most people don't realize. What they saw in Walking Tall was nothing like how the ambush really happened.
No.
They had two cars and they had submachine guns and cars jumping off the road, the whole 9 yards, when Buford actually stopped right there on the road, and it was a single carbine, not multiple people with machine guns. Of course, in one movie, I think they said that his car was hit 125 times when the TBI came out and said that there were 14 to 17 shots that were fired. Not all of them stayed in cars, because some of them just went from one side to the other through glass windows and out in the middle of nowhere, but they did collect some rounds, I understand it, from the dash and the back panel there. But there wasn't over 100 rounds fired like the movie showed. Everything in the movie was so dramatic. I mean, I'm sure that the studio just jazzed things up just to make it more entertaining. But yet people walk away believing that's the way it happened. And
well, Mike, like I've told people, I was there. I found the site there that morning. I know exactly how it was laid out. Ray Charles, you could have took him there, and he could have figured out that the whole thing was made up, because the way those hulls were laying out there, it's just like somebody walked down the side of the car pulling the trigger. There was no car moving there, and I don't know, from what I understand, to the inside of the car, what was puzzling was that was blood on the hood, matched his type of blood. But inside the car, there was very little of his type blood found inside.
Now that I don't know, because I've seen suggestions, but I've never seen any factual reports, because of course the TBI is a closed state and they won't share that information. Now, Jerry Hathcock, before it was a closed state, he got some information like that, but even he wouldn't say which blood type was outside, which was inside. And of course, a lot of it was convoluted because it was they were both inside the car and both bleeding at some point.
Well, it's supposed to have been type A that was on the hood, but there was very little type A on the inside of the car. And then they found there was some let's say, how did they found some blood that they couldn't type. I mean, I saw the report on it, not from the TBI, but it was in the paper. I found a newspaper where they had talked to the TBI, and I'd never seen it before. But it was telling about where the type A and what type blood she had, and
okay. I've never seen that particular report. I've just seen the one that Jerry Hathcock had, so I don't know. I just hope the TBI gets all this figured out. I think we all know now, anybody that is reasonable, if they can put all the legend aside, if they can look at the facts rather than the legend, and like I say, try to determine all this with their heads instead of their hearts, I think it's a solvable case. I think that, hopefully they'll come down and be able to make a determination based upon the information that they've gained recently, what happened.
Have you ever heard that there was a bloody handprint on the rear bumper?
Not on the rear bumper. I've got a bloodied handprint on the outside of Buford's door.
Right.
I've got a photo of that.
It said that this was on the bumper of the car. On the rear bumper.
I don't know anything about the rear bumper. Very well could be true. If there's one on the door, there could be one on the bumper as well. Who knows? Hopefully the TBI. So, well, gentlemen, kind of wrapping it up. Like I say, hopefully between now and the next few weeks, we'll learn something one way or the other. I've always gone to where the evidence takes me. And of course, I don't have all of that. But hopefully the TBI will have some stuff that they will mix in with everything that we've been able to, locate and determine what actually did happen. Any comments?
Yeah.
I think the TBI's got enough. They didn't do all of this exhuming the body and doing all that because they didn't have anything else to do.
Oh, that's absolutely right. Exhuming a body is something they take very, very seriously. You don't do it on a whim. You do it if you have something that leads you to believe that there's a reason for it. And so I would suggest that they have some things that we don't know. But hopefully we'll find out.
Right.
Well, guys, I appreciate you joining me here today. It's been interesting.
Enjoyed it, Mike. Thank you for having us.
I appreciate you being on here. Now you've seen all the evidence that has been presented tonight. You've heard what Dennis Hathcock, who was at the ambush site that morning, had to say, as well as what Tim Lancaster, whose father was at the ambush site that day, told his family. Now, to add to that, I want you to see what it would be like to drive that ambush route during the daytime, and then consider how difficult it would be to drive the same route at night with no headlights. This is how the ambush route looks during the daytime hours. As you can see, the road is much improved over what it was then. It is now paved and has markings in the center lane. Now, as you pull out from the church parking lot, you see houses nearby. Now, you need to understand those did not exist back in August of 1967. This was all just wooded area. As you drive down through here, you also see traffic signs. These were not there in that time frame. As you go into a tree canopy, you see more signs indicating a curve. And as you come out, there's a fairly long straightaway here. Now, if you can imagine a car chasing Buford. At this point, you see another curve in the distance. Now, keep in mind, this is what it was like in daylight. As you leave this, you see a long straight stretch, and in the distance, you see the first ambush site. That is how quickly you get there. And keep in mind, we're traveling at about 30 miles an hour here. This is the first ambush site, the bridge where the shooting allegedly took place. Now here is the same route taken in the pre-dawn hours. Notice it's almost totally dark as you put out on the roadway. As a matter of fact, I can't see, so I'm forced to turn on my parking lights just to be able to see the center line, so I'll know how to navigate. Now you can look up and see that it's about dawn, and you also see the lights on the homes that are nearby. You couldn't see those back in those days because they didn't exist. And you also see traffic signs that did not exist back then. Now, as you go into the canopy of the trees, it's totally dark. The only way I knew how to navigate this stretch was because of the signs that are reflective and my parking lights reflecting off the center line. Now come out from under the canopy and I head down a short straight stretch. You could make a little speed here, but the highest I got up to was 32 miles an hour. That's as safe as I could be. Now you're back under a canopy again, totally dark. Can you imagine an ambush party doing this with no headlights? And with the curves, there's no way that they could have followed Buford's taillights. Now as you break from this, and you're going down the straight stretch, you're coming up on the first ambush site. This is the bridge where gunshots first erupted and Pauline was wounded, according to Buford. This is the bridge right here. Then you go through a gentle curve. Can you imagine that? Now you've seen all the information that's been presented. You've heard from Dennis Hathcock, who was at the ambush scene that morning. You've also heard from Tim Lancaster, whose father was at the scene that morning. You've heard what both of them have had to say. Now, I would like for you to take a look at all of this and consider it. And please, as you do, try to decide who may have killed Pauline Pusser. And all I ask is that you think with your head and not your heart.
The argument that was overheard at the Old Hickory Grill by Barbara Bivens and Shirley Smith. The threat Buford made to Pauline's life. Carl's call to Ward Moore that morning. What Levon Plunk heard, the gunshot. The droplets of blood that Ward Moore saw on the carpet. What Diane saw, Buford putting Pauline in the car. The route Buford took that morning. How an ambush party would know he would take this route. The car using no headlights to navigate that route. The locations of the shell casings found at the second site. The blood on the outside of the car when Buford said neither he nor Pauline exited. The missing time. Now consider the 8 people who saw or heard something. Barbara Bivens, Shirley Smith, Dennis Hathcock, Johnny Harrison, Carl Pusser, Ward Moore, Levon Plunk, and Diane Vance. Could all of these people be wrong and only Buford be correct?